Hi, my viewers. Welcome to Professor Beatrice Burugo Talk Show. This is a channel where I discuss issues that are psychological, social, and mental that affect the population in our world today. If you are new to this YouTube channel, kindly subscribe, share the link, and turn on the notification bell so that when we upload new videos, you'll be notified. Today, we are discussing, or we are having a topic that is very, very key to all of us. It is about childhood trauma and how we can manage it. So welcome. And when we talk about childhood trauma, this is actually trauma is an injury that we get. And there are types of trauma that we experience as adults, as children. And so some of the traumas that we get in our childhood stage, they affect us when we become adults. We have the physical trauma. The physical trauma actually is as a result of when somebody was injured, the body, maybe through an accident or through a certain illness. Then we have psychological trauma. This is the trauma actually, or the injury that affects our way of behaving and our way of thinking. So you'll find that some experiences we went through as children, they actually affect us later in childhood. The other type of trauma is emotional trauma. Remember, emotions touch on our affective domain. It touches on how we feel about others, how we feel about ourselves. And so emotions have to do with anger, happiness, anxiety, aggressiveness, irritability. So these emotions could be positive. They could also be negative. And so these emotions will actually affect how we relate with others later in life. We really want to know what are some of the symptoms of somebody who has undergone through childhood trauma, and actually how can they manage this trauma. This trauma will leave traces. Any type of trauma will leave traces in the mind. And so it really requires intervention. It really requires somebody to come in and help the person overcome the traumatic experience that they went through when they were young. For example, when somebody was a young child and they were violated, their rights were violated. For example, they were neglected, they were beaten, maybe they were emotionally hurt. If this kind of trauma is not attended to, it turns out to affect them later in adulthood. And therefore, they require a lot of support. By seeking services from a mental health practitioner like a counselor, somebody to share the trauma, the traumatic experience. Because if they are not shared out and they are helped out of the situation, they get stuck at whichever level. And remember, the physical trauma affects the way of thinking of a person. And so some will become anxious about their traumatic events later in adulthood, and any trigger of any sort, anything that reminds them about what they went through as children, it can impact negatively if the issue was not handled. For example, when we talk of parenting, some children, they are abused when they are young. Maybe some are with their step-parents or some are with their real parents. Others were brought up by siblings. And so when they were neglected, you realize that they actually become stuck there. And later in life, as they grow, they project those hurting feelings to others. Actually, research that has been done in the world shows that adults who actually are anxious, who have suicidal ideations, who develop the depression symptoms, and the interpersonal relationship issues that are negative, could have the root cause being their childhood experiences. when you were brought up, what kind of attachment was there with the parents? What kind of attachment was there when you went to school? And so if you experienced even beatings by other learners in school, you're likely to project the same. You are likely to even abuse if you are abused when you were young. And so that is why we didn't need to manage trauma in its initial stages, so that it doesn't qualify and graduate to become trauma that is really deep-rooted, trauma that becomes chronic, because it can lead to mental breakdown. Some of the violences we find in the world today, they are actually all over, even on the televisions and other platforms, the social media platforms. So what are we doing to our children? They watch the violence. And when they watch the violence, it triggers what they went through when they were young. Maybe they were abused, or the violent acts were done on them. And so when they watch violent movies, or they watch violent, or they are brought up in violent families, this one later in life, they embrace that, and actually they make it their habit. It is like they are already used to this kind of traumatic experiences. So to them, hurting others is almost equal to normal life. And that is why we need to manage trauma, especially in its initial stages, before one becomes an adult. Sometimes we may not understand whether we are traumatized until an expert in the area of mental health is able to assess and get the root cause of that trauma. For example, you may find somebody trying to avoid any kind of relationship. And if you are careful and you follow up their story from when they were young children, you will realize that there was no secure attachment with the siblings or the parents, or no secure attachment with the friends, or maybe they were abused, or they were beaten, they were sexually molested, they were harassed, they were done many things. And so basically it will take an assessment to be done so that this child or this adult is helped out of this kind of trauma. So basically when we talk about management of trauma, the first thing is identify the source of trauma from the childhood stage, and how long has that trauma persisted over the years. If it is a trauma that has taken a short while, it is easier to treat. It is easier to help that person out of that trauma. But if it has persisted for years, for example, marital inflicted trauma, it may have stayed for 10, 20 years, some 30 years, some 40 years. Then it builds up the tension. And to the person who is being violated, or the rights are being violated, they build the tension slowly by slowly. And I liken it to a balloon. When you put air in it, it is so full, you really need to leave it. When it stretches to the threshold that is normal, you have to release you don't hand any air. But if you continue putting in more air, what actually happens to the balloon? It bursts. What bursting means here, when trauma escalates to levels that are very high to be managed, you will find people committing suicide, you will find people killing others, and then people ask, why are people so inhuman? It is not the people that are so inhuman, it is the traumatic experiences that they went through that shaped them to what they are today. And that is why mental health comes in very, very strongly, to really be able to address issues as the problems occur in childhood. You need to understand, what did you go through, what did you lack, what did you get, so that even as you handle a person, you really understand very well that I am socialized this way, I am socialized to be violent, I am socialized to be aggressive, I am socialized to be bad or to be good. So when we manage trauma, we need to look at the length of time that the trauma has persisted. We need to look at the gender also, because you'll find that women are more prone to traumatic experiences than males. And if the male partner or the male person inflicted the trauma, they may not even marry if they are ready. They may avoid marriages because they link or they connect the marriage with the marital violence or the gender-based violence. So you also need to consider gender, because males are also, they also go through the same violence, but it differs across cultures, it differs across the gender. So it's very, very important that you also look at that. The other thing you need to look at is the intensity of the trauma. How heavy, how intense, how right was the trauma? For example, death is a traumatic experience that is very intense. It comes and affects our emotions. Actually, death is so emotional. It is so tragic, and especially the death of a loved one. So when you handle somebody who has experienced death, it is not like somebody who has been maybe physically assaulted, and it is not to a big magnitude. You really need to assess the type of trauma. It may be accident, but also the type of accident, how major, how minor it was, also it differs. So you really need to consider the type of trauma that the person is going through. Another thing you need to consider in trauma management from childhood and that can affect adulthood is actually the source. The source of that trauma, is it multiple source or it is a single source, or did it develop? There are traumas that actually develop as we grow. A very good example, if one is born with their eyes okay, later they lose their eyesight, they become partially blind or they become blind, it's not the same way as somebody who was born blind. So you need to really look at even the period of time when that trauma struck, and so that you can intervene. And some type of trauma actually affect a whole nation. They affect a whole generation. Remember, trauma is multi-generational, that it can be passed from one culture to another. It can be passed from one nation to another. And you will find that countries where we have experienced a lot of traumatic experience, it produces a population that will hand over the traces of trauma, will be passed from the grandchild, from the grandparent to the parents, to the grandchild, to the great-grandchild. So what I take to be very key is the intervention stage. We need to intervene as mental health practitioners. We also need to assess the type of trauma, and the proper intervention should be given through counseling, where they open up, and using other therapies so that these members of our society are helped. Otherwise, for today from me, if kindly you've not subscribed to this YouTube channel, kindly subscribe. You also share the link with your friends. And if you require any trauma counseling services, you can contact us through the contacts on the screen, or you can visit us at Bridge Counselling Center, located in Kinoru, Meru, and we will be there for you. And for now, from me, for now, it is bye-bye.